Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Newberg, and you have joined the webinar for the pre-application overview session for the Florida Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery, Hurricane Hermine, and Matthew. It is a pleasure to be with you. I'm with Capital Access. We're a HUD technical assistance provider, and we've been working with Florida Department of Economic Opportunity on this application cycle. The objectives for the pre-application overview is to review HUD and Florida DEO CDBG-DR program objectives and compliance requirements, review that in detail, and discuss some strategies that you may want to consider in developing successful programs and projects. We'll provide ample time for questions and responses at the end. You can submit your questions online through the GoToWebinar function. There is a handout section with all the documents, and all the documents that I'm reviewing with you today are on the Florida DEO CDBG Disaster Recovery website, and I'll actually show you that in 1 minute. So we're going to walk through the application guide. That's going to give you a background and general information on what DEO is looking for in a submission. Talk in detail about the HUD CDBG-DR funding directives. Talk about threshold and scoring criteria so that you can clearly understand what DEO is looking for in proposals, and then who are eligible applicants, what are eligible activities, and then we'll actually review the application in terms of the applicant information form, the proposal information form, and the housing and non-housing budget templates. Again, feel free to submit questions, and we will review them at the end. So the DEO website has got a lot of excellent materials for your review, and what I'd like to do now is just go to that for a minute. Right here, this is the top of the website, Disaster Recovery Initiative, and as you scroll down, you will see the 2017 register and then the Hermine and Matthew competitive cycle. And below that is the full application guide, the information form, the proposal information form, the budget template. We have a sample filled out budget template, and then this actual PowerPoint presentation that I'm reviewing with you today. In addition, because we live in the digital age, there was an application overview session on April 4th, last week, and if you've got an extra 3.5 hours, you can sit and watch the whole presentation. And I'm seeing from the attendance list a few people that were there, so thank you for joining us again today. So the idea is to be as transparent as possible and give you as many resources as possible to put together a compelling. Okay. Use the website, and on the website you can download the Hermine Matthew plan. If everyone can mute their lines, that would be great. This application cycle is subject to a pending action plan amendment by HUD. What happened was that as we were working through this application cycle, there were opportunities to provide clarification and more flexibility for all of you, and DEO made the decision to submit some incremental action plan amendments to facilitate that for all of you. Also, there's the HUD Exchange, which is actually pretty formidable, and we encourage you to check that out. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So this application cycle is for $22.4 million available for eligible and qualified projects that meet HUD and CDBG-DR program objectives and compliance requirements. Only units of local government, including counties and municipalities that are located in eligible areas that experienced storm damage from Hermine and Matthew, are eligible to apply. The minimum CDBG-DR allocation amount is $750,000 per subrecipient. There was a cap for the maximum amount in the action plan, and DEO decided to request that that be removed, and that is an action plan amendment, and that gives you all flexibility in terms of your proposals. The eligible counties are listed below in terms of Hermine and Matthew, Citrus, Dixie, Hernando, Hillsborough, Leon, Levy, Manatee, Pasco, Pinellas, Taylor, Wakulla, Brevard, Duval, Flagler, Indian River, Nassau, Putnam, Seminole, Volusia. Now, this is critical. Any proposed programs or projects must be tied to storm damage from Hermine and Matthew. And so this is the presidential disaster declarations. You can just look them up if you feel like it. You cannot use CDBG-DR funds to replace or reimburse FEMA, individual or public assistance, and or small business administration loans. In certain situations, you can use CDBG-DR funds as a match, such as for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Okay, the next two are specific HUD directives. With each CDBG disaster recovery allocation, HUD issues what's known as a notice, and that notice is all the rules. And in that, HUD does a lot of rulemaking, but they do policy clarification. And in this, for Hermine and Matthew, there are two big principles. One, provide maximum feasible priority to activities that will benefit low and moderate income families. At least 70% of the CDBG-DR grant from hurricanes Hermine and Matthew must serve households and or areas with low and moderate incomes. And HUD wants to see a focus first on unmet housing needs. Now, some of you may have very significant infrastructure improvement or economic revitalization needs. We understand, HUD understands. In early February, there was a continuing resolution with the federal budget that actually allocated $28 billion for disaster recovery. Of that is a special program where there'll be $12 billion nationally just for resiliency, separate from this. So there will be more resources for infrastructure coming. In this particular funding round, the emphasis is on unmet housing needs. DEO will apply a two-phase process to review applications. Proposals must first pass HUD CDBG-DR threshold compliance criteria, and then DEO will review and score each proposal based on that scoring criteria. If a proposal does not meet the threshold, DEO will not and cannot proceed to score it for funding. The maximum score is 200 points per proposal. Okay, let's start with national objectives. They are as follows. Benefit low and moderate income individuals, and that's typically moderate income is 80% of area median income and below. Benefit low to moderate income areas, benefit low and moderate income jobs, and a new category of a national objective, and this came from 2016, is low and moderate incomes for buyouts and housing incentives that benefit low and moderate income households. This is a big deal because as the storms become more frequent and more powerful, certain areas are experiencing repeat storm damage, which is creating distress for property owners and burdening the public services of a community. And some people are asking, hey, I think it's time to leave. Can we get some help? Here, if they're low and moderate income, that service of the buyout with a housing incentive meets a national objective, and that is progress. If it addresses an urgent need, if it provides aid for elimination of slum or blight areas or slum and blight spot-specific property parcels, your proposal must meet one of these national objectives in order to be considered for funding. Second, projects or programs must meet a CDBG-DR eligible activity. Proposal can meet more than one, but it's got to meet at least one. And they are typically grouped in terms of housing, infrastructure, and economic revitalization. In a minute, we'll go into greater detail with that. 3, projects or programs must address following clear unmet need. It has to be tied to Hermine and or Matthew storm damage, primarily serve low and moderate income populations, and primarily serve housing activities. So those are your 3, a national objective, an eligible activity, and tied to the storm, serving low and moderate income populations, and primarily serving housing. That is your threshold. Now, the scoring criteria is as follows. First, management capacity, 35 points. What is your capacity to manage this program and assume a 2-year period to start and finish your program or project? If you don't have that capacity, what is your plan to procure it? Second, readiness to proceed in a viable production plan. In the actual proposal application form, we give you some benchmarks where DEO will use to get a sense of your readiness to proceed. I'll give you an example. If you are proposing a new rental housing project to address the unmet need of lost affordable rental housing, you have site control of the property, that's a good sign towards readiness to proceed. If you've done environmental reviews and it is clean and it meets all zoning for what you want to do, that gives an example of readiness to proceed. If you don't have site control, then that presents questions. It doesn't mean you would be excluded, it just means it brings up some questions of concern. And if other proposals similar in nature have site control, well, they're closer to readiness to proceed. Proposals are cost reasonable in the budget. HUD now wants to see that a grantee or subrecipient does their own budgeting prior to going out to bid. Some preliminary research to explore what is happening in the market for what you want to do that you can use as a reference as you take things out to bid. What is your thought process behind the budget? And then storm resilience. This is just very important. There were a lot of storms last year, and they seem to come more frequently with a whole bunch of power. In many ways, Florida had 10 years of quiet, and after Andrew did a lot of innovation with the building code, and I would submit to you the housing stock performed pretty well. But as you know, there's a lot of properties that are 30, 40, 50 years old and just weren't built to those storm resilience standards. Going forward, HUD wants to see thoughtful integration of storm resilience. Fifth, overall low and moderate income benefit. What percent benefits low and moderate income household and or areas? Overall housing eligible activities, and then vulnerable populations, 20 points. Vulnerable populations are defined as following. Transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, and permanent housing needs of individuals and families that are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, prevention of low-income individuals and families with children, especially for people at 30% of area median or below from becoming homeless, and then special needs, people who are not homeless but require supportive housing, such as the elderly with disabilities, people with substance abuse addictions, people with HIV and AIDS and their families, as well as public housing residents. So clearly serving vulnerable populations provides an opportunity for 20 points. So a project can get a maximum of 200 points. So eligible applicants, units of general local government, including counties and municipalities located in eligible areas for hurricanes Hermine and Matthew. DEO recommends a strategic approach to bring capacity to your team if you currently don't have it. You may want to consider leveraging the capacity of nonprofit and for-profit organizations who can serve as contractors to the subrecipient. You may want to apply as a group. There may be 2 or 3 counties that are adjacent to each other, and you want to do scattered site home repair and mobile home replacement. You may want to join forces in a joint application. The one thing that DEO requires, 2 things actually, is that there be one lead designated applicant who will contractually serve as the subrecipient, and then the subrecipient acting as the lead cannot subgrant funds to other governments. What does that mean on a practical basis? Let's say a group of 3 counties join forces and are awarded an allocation. Prior to executing the subrecipient agreement, DEO will require that all parties enter into an interlocal agreement that specifies the terms and conditions for how they will manage the grant together. So now we return to eligible activities, and we're going to start with housing. All of these activities are specified in the Hermine and Matthew Action Plan. Temporary relocation, that's in compliance with the Uniform Relocation Act, buyouts and acquisitions, demolition clearance, single-family housing rehab or repair, multifamily housing rehab or repair, new housing construction. This is where CDBG disaster recovery is different from traditional CDBG. You can do new construction housing so long as it is meeting unmet needs. Public housing repair, shelters for the homeless, repair and replacement of manufactured housing, hazard mitigation, elevation, planning activities specifically related to housing. Now, you could, in your proposal, do more than one eligible activity. For example, if you're doing a bread and butter single-family home repair program, you may also do manufactured housing replacement. You may do demolition and clearance. You may also do a buyout and some temporary relocation. You're serving the needs of your community. How well you identify that and quantify the need is what will position you for a stronger proposal. Now, with infrastructure, DEO will consider non-housing proposals when non-housing improvements support housing, repair, reconstruction, and or resilience in a community, and the applicant provides satisfactory evidence that unmet housing needs have been addressed. So you may have a very significant critical drainage infrastructure improvement project that needs to get done. But if you can't show that you've addressed unmet housing needs, that presents an issue. Now, you may be presenting a project where you propose to do home repair on a street, and that street also has drainage issues, and you're going to write a proposal for funding to address the drainage issues. The key is that the infrastructure project has a link to the housing. Additional categories: restoration of infrastructure, public facilities, such as emergency community shelters, demolition and rehabilitation of publicly or privately owned commercial or industrial buildings, economic revitalization, which helps restore and improve the local economy, public services, just be aware that the 15% cap applies, and finally, renourishment of protective coastal dunes systems. Okay, applicants must identify how unmet needs will be addressed or how economic revitalization or infrastructure activities will contribute to the long-term recovery and restoration of housing in the most impacted and distressed areas. Economic revitalization activities can address job losses or negative impacts to tax revenues or businesses, and you can do loans, grants, job training, improvements to districts, and financing that can attract and retain workers in devastated communities. Now, if you are awarded an allocation of CDBG-DR funds, you're going to execute a subrecipient agreement with DEO. And in that, you're going to have to comply with all of these requirements. Some of them are specific to HUD, and some of them are what are known as the cross-cutting federal regulations. And I want to bring to your attention, Section 3 is a big deal, which is what are your affirmative efforts to identify and provide opportunities for local hires, particularly earning low and moderate income, as well as business enterprises. Okay, let's talk about mechanics of the application cycle. The application cycle will officially open at a future date, and it will be open for 30 days. The timing of the application cycle is contingent on some internal rulemaking and a substantial action plan amendment approval by HUD. Here's the thought process. DEO wanted to get this application out to you sooner than later. HUD is currently reviewing the action plan amendments, and DEO expects that to be completed by the end of April. The application was made available through the website and an email notice to you on, I believe, March 26th. We did the pre-application overview on the 4th. We're doing this webinar now. So you effectively, if I was managing time, assume that the application cycle would start around May 1st and the applications would be due May 31st. So that is at least 8 weeks for you to organize your proposals, engage in public comment, and get prepared. As soon as the action plan amendment is approved, you'll get notice of when the application cycle begins, and that will be on the website. When in doubt, check out the CDBG-DR myflorida.com website. Now, for submission purposes, you do one copy, hard copy, that you send to DEO directly in the mail, and then one electronic copy that you send to DEO via email. We're trying to avoid unnecessary paper, and you'll see how the application was developed. We're trying to keep this as simple as possible for you. So what is included in an application submission? First, you do a cover letter. Specify the name and contact information of the applicant and any UGLUG partners. List each program and or project for which you request funding and how much. Provide a brief summary of what you want to accomplish and what is your capacity to exceed. And a signature of an authorized executive officer or designee. Then there's the applicant information form, which is basic organizational information. And then it's the proposal information form, and that's where you get the detail of what you want to do, and that's what will be scored by DEO. In addition, you'll need to submit a budget, and there's a separate template for housing and a separate template for non-housing. If you're doing non-housing, such as infrastructure or economic revitalization, you will need to submit a map that has 3 overlays: the location and or service area, the low and moderate income population in that service area, most recent floodplain map. This helps with compliance. Now, 6, provide a work plan for your housing and or non-housing proposal, and provide your evidence of readiness to proceed. This is not a template. You submit the work plan in the format that works best for you. If you do a 15-page work plan, that's a lot of information. If you do a work plan that is 1/3 of a page, that's not a lot of information. So that's to your judgment about the size and depth, but connect the dots for DEO to see that you've got capacity and readiness to proceed, and that you've thought through how you're going to run your program. And as an optional attachment, not required, but very helpful, provide an organization chart and a schedule of your team, their roles such as staff, contractors, vendors, community partners, and who does what. Okay. So let us now move on to the forms. Now, first thing I want to bring your attention to in the guide is as you go through to page 14 in the guide, there are instructions on how to download these Adobe files and then save them. And that's important because as soon as you download it, you want to save it. So your cover letter, let's say you do it in Word, you would save it as 1, and let's just say the applicant is Florida County. So Florida County -cover letter.pdf. For the applicant information form, it would be 2 applicant information form, 2 Florida County -applicant form. And then if you're doing a housing budget, if you're doing a housing project, it would be applicant name, housing proposal. And if you're doing a non-housing, it would be applicant name, non-housing proposal. And then for the budgets, it's the same. And then service area and work plan and org chart. That's your naming convention. So that when you email it, it's very clear. And when you print it and send it, it's also very clear. So here's the applicant information form. And you basically, once you download it, can type in all the information that's needed. And if you run into any questions about any of the cells, just send an email to Kevin Ogden at Florida DEO and he'll get back to you. So name, location, executive officer, any members of your team. If you used a consultant to prepare the application, who is that? DEO reserves the option to call you during the application review process to get clarification. And then how much you've requested, and any jurisdictions that you're serving. Are you in the National Flood Insurance Program? And confirm that your activities are consistent with a local comprehensive plan. That is the proposal information form, 1 page. Second is the more detailed and involved proposal information form. And this is where you lay out your program. Now, if you find that you need to provide more information than what can be included in this form, provide additional pages. Put your best foot forward. What we tried to do with this was design an application that would not be too taxing to complete, and hopefully it achieves that goal. So you put your name, the program name, the address, a brief description, homeowner services, and then for how much you're applying. And then explicitly type in yes for what national objectives you will be fulfilling. This is huge for HUD. CDBG is all about national objectives and eligible activities, so be specific. And then listing the total area population if you can, number of low, moderate income households, and help us connect the dots that you are truly doing a low mod service area. And then just a description of how the service area was determined. This is important because sometimes tying an unmet need to storm damage might get complicated. And we want to see your thought process so that it gets recorded appropriately. Because with large sums of money, like disaster recovery, it will be audited. And the best way to manage an audit is to provide a very clear trail of paper and records that reflect your analysis and thought process. So with eligible activities, you mark yes if it's housing or infrastructure revitalization, and then you see from what we covered in the presentation all the eligible activities. And so you may, again, like my previous example, have a single-family program where there might be some people that need temporary relocation while the work's being done. You might have to demolish a single-family home, and you might need to do some reconstruction. While you're at it, some of the single-family homes are close to some manufactured housing, and you need to do that too. That is fine. That's fine. There's a linkage there. And so that makes sense. You have that flexibility. Now, what we ask is if you're doing a non-housing proposal, that you save another copy of this form that would be the non-housing form, and here you would specify which non-housing eligible activities you're pursuing. And then there's the vulnerable populations. Now we move on to unmet needs. And this is where you need to share and specify how the unmet need is tied to Hermine or Matthew hurricane disaster events. And oh, 1 second. Each city or county. All right, we will address these questions at the end, and thank you for providing the questions. Good. Okay, lay out your thought process, your analysis of unmet needs. Describe how your project or program will address the unmet needs. And then if you can specify the number of units and dollars serving low and moderate income populations, so much the better. Describe how your proposed program or project primarily serves low and moderate income populations. And if you have the benefit of an updated list of people who experience storm damage and you know their incomes, so much the better. You may not right now. That's okay. But if you have it, so much the better. An example to strengthen your application. Let's say in your county there are 250 people that experience storm damage on single-family homes. Well, it's been 18 months since the storm. How many people have done the work themselves? Was the FEMA money enough? Maybe it would be worth your time to engage some of your community organizations to do an updated survey and meet with people. And that's a way of updating the needs analysis. Because here's the thing. When a storm happens, people use FEMA, they use insurance proceeds, maybe they have some cash, maybe they take on a loan. But for low and moderate income people, there's not a lot of discretionary income. And so maybe the roof got fixed and maybe the electricity and HVAC is working, but there's still an awful lot of damage that still needs repair that's tied to the storm. That's an eligible applicant because there's still unmet needs. The more you can do to update that list of people you seek to serve, the stronger your application is. And then for non-housing, we've gone over this, but it's important to repeat. HUD requires each grantee to primarily consider and address its unmet housing recovery needs. Grantees are allowed to allocate funds to address unmet economic revitalization infrastructure needs, but in doing so, the grantee must identify how unmet housing needs will be addressed or how the economic revitalization or infrastructure activity will contribute to the long-term recovery and restoration of housing in the most impacted and distressed areas. So this is where you lay out that linkage. And then we want to see how it serves low and moderate income populations and how it aligns with local mitigation and resilience plans. The management capacity. This is really big. Florida's getting a lot of disaster recovery money, and it's got to get spent quickly, and there are some rules. So the question is, do you have enough staff capacity if you were to get this grant, manage the program? If you don't, then what is your plan to add that capacity? This is where you lay it out. In addition, what's the experience and capacity of your team? Have you done comparable projects like this? What's worked well? What needed improvement? And what steps have you taken to address that capacity? And then if you're not fully formed, what is your procurement process? This is a huge issue for HUD and the Inspector General. They want to see that you follow procurement, Part 85, clearly and with integrity. What's your strategy to augment staff and operations and your management capacity? Are you going to get hired staff, contractors, or vendors? And again, an org chart is good. We'll need a copy of the Citizens Complaint Policy. So now, readiness to proceed. Starting with programs, so like a home repair program, have you updated your needs, unmet needs? What's the documentation to do that? Have you quantified your universe of clients? How did you do it? Do you have in-house staff or contractors already on board? Have you done a budget? Did you get any matching funds? If you do not have matching funds, that is not a negative. It is a plus if you have it. If you do not, it is not viewed as a negative. And for projects, you have site control, you have zoning and community approval, environmental clearance, and is your team together, and do you have a commitment of matching funds? If you're proposing doing a $15 million apartment building and you're asking for $2.5 million in CDBG-DR, DO is going to say, okay, what's the plan for the other $12.5 million? And if that isn't clear, that impacts readiness to proceed. Then provide your production work plan, and then showing that you have a cost-reasonable budget. Now, in the narrative for the budget, this is where you tell the story of how you arrived at your budget. With your cost estimates, what's the basis of the cost estimate? Was it a quote? Was it a bid? Was it experience from previous projects? What is your thought process? And in addition, showing how you will not duplicate benefits. The key thing with DR funding is It doesn't want to reimburse another funding source. That's not the intention. The intention is to address unmet needs. With leverage and committed additional sources, you lay them out here. The amount, is it committed? If not, what's the status? And please note, if you provide through your municipality or county a waiver of fees or in-kind office space or in-kind staff, that's a match. That's leverage. So please consider that. You may want to turn a county community center into an application intake center and avoid paying a lease, something to that effect. Finally, storm disaster resilience. Describe how your proposed program or project will proactively invest in resilience to damage from future storms as specified in the Register and Action Plan. So let's be clear. You may have a traditional rehab come in at $50,000. And in order to harden the structure and maybe elevate the HVAC and mechanicals, you're going to incur an extra $7,500. I'm just choosing a number, it's not specific. So long as you designate that as a storm resilience strategy, that's bona fide. That's important because it is making the house more resilient to future storms. Then finally, you're supporting documentation, service area maps, and other considerations in terms of other jurisdiction with your proposal. Finally, a signature from an authorized representative, and that is your proposal information form. Got through it. Okay, so now we take a look at the budget. And on the website, you'll see housing budget and then sample housing budget. So this is the sample housing budget, and it's for Florida County, Florida. It's a homeowner services program. So first we start with direct costs. This budget is organized similar to CDBG budgeting. Direct costs, program activity delivery costs, planning and administration costs. That's the thought process. So first, what are the direct costs? This is a 45-unit program to serve homeowners, 45 of them. There's going to be a home repair component to it, and that will be single family, and you'll see the drop-down menu for all the eligible activities you choose. And then what national objective, again, drop-down menus of the national objectives, and then how many units. So in this particular scenario, the applicant is saying, on average, we estimate $60,000 per repair of a single-family home, and that's 25 times 16, simple formula. Anything in yellow is where you input. Anything in white is a formula. This is not a cell-protected budget. You can add rows. The formulas will be checked, and if you have nuclear meltdown and all the formulas get messed up, just simply give Kevin Ogden a call at DEO, and we'll get you sorted out. In this scenario here, the total cost is $1.5 million, and you'll see that the Shula Foundation is offering $250,000 as a match, and that's because the Larry Zonka Foundation just wasn't interested. I don't know. That's a Florida joke from the 1970s to show how old I am. And then you have a manufactured house replacement program to replace manufactured housing units. Again, low and moderate income, 15 at 65,000 a unit, 975,000. There's no matching for that, so that's straight ask of 975 for CDBG-DR funds. Temporary relocation, this applicant is estimating 5 at 10,800. Well, how do you arrive at 10,800? Oh, 900 a month for 12 months. Just show your rationale. You may have a tenant only need to be out for 6 months or 14 months. That's the nature of a budget. DEO wants to see your thought process. So here, you're looking at total direct costs at $2,529,000. With the $250,000 grant from the Shula Foundation, the actual CDBG-DR request is $2,279,000. Now we move on to activity delivery costs. And a lot of subrecipients may say, you know, where's the admin? I need admin to run this program. One of the beautiful things about Community Development Block Grant is if you can tie your staff time to a specific project or program or property address, and you're working on that, you can bill for that time through program activity delivery costs as opposed to administration costs. So here, there's going to be a program manager, and the estimate is that that program manager will be working for 24 months on the program, pretty much full-time, and that the salary and fringe benefits and health care is all $90,000, so it's $90,000 divided by 12 gets you to $7,500 a month or $180,000 for the 2 years. There's a case manager and processor, and roughly $50,000 a year working full-time for producing the 45 units. Now, environmental review is an eligible program activity delivery cost, estimate $500,000. If your bid comes in at, $500. If your bid comes in at $400, you simply type in 400 and it goes from 22.5 to 18,000. And there you have the 45 units. You must do environmental review for every property that is getting improvements with federal funds. And then the damage assessors, scope writer, construction inspector, legal and title, marketing and outreach. You may say, I don't need marketing and outreach. I have a list of 90 people. Okay, don't include it in the budget. This is just giving you an idea of how to approach laying out your budget. What is a budget? A budget is an outline that tells the story of the assumptions and the goals and the parameters of how you want to do your program or project. And that's why in the narrative, you want to give as much explanation on how you arrived at it. Now, with the intake center, the county is donating the space, and comparable market value for that space is $1,250 a month. So that's a savings in kind of $30,000. Similar supplies. And then a structural engineer is on call for certain properties. So that was hard to estimate, and you're eyeballing it. So for total activity delivery is $564,000. There's a match of 48, and that comes in at 17.8%. If your activity delivery costs start going above 20%, just be clear on why, so it doesn't raise an issue. There might be a good reason behind it. Just specify it. And then administration and overhead, there's executive supervision, and roughly 10% of the executive's time over 2 years, and then financial management. Now, that's coming in at $80,000 or 2.5%. So the total budget is $3,173,000, and the request is $2,875,000. Okay, So if you're doing single family, DEO will manage the duplication of benefits and verification of benefits and overall verification review process centrally. You will not have that responsibility. Once awarded, DEO will provide you with instructions on training on how that works, but you do not have to carry that cost in your budget. Okay. So we've gone over the forms, we've gone over the budget. Let's go over the timeline. So we're doing our overview sessions. This is the webinar. And now we enter the interim actions phase. 3 things happen. First, HUD is reviewing and hopefully approving the action plan amendment. And DEO estimates that that will occur at the end of April. And actually, the Florida rule is not an emergency. That's being processed now. It's going well. And then here's what you all need to do. Do your targeted outreach. Post your draft plans and funding requests. Engage in the CDBG required 14-day public comment and hearing process. Take advantage to get as much public input as you can. And on the assumption that the action plan amendment is approved by the end of February, then you will get a notice that the application cycle has begun on May 1st. That is the estimate. And then you have until May 31st to submit your proposals. In the interim, DEO is available to respond to questions. With the webinar, with the in-person overview session, we got a bunch of questions. We got a couple questions through email, and within the week, they will be posted on the website for your review. The idea is if an individual submits a question related to this application, DEO will provide the question and the answer available to everyone for your benefit. And again, the estimated deadline for submission is the 31st of May, and then DEO will take a month to review, score, and make the final selections of proposals. After that, you enter the process of negotiating and arriving at a subrecipient agreement so that you can begin to draw down funds. Well, we got through that in 52 minutes. Want to thank you for all your time, and please note that this application and its accompanying forms are contingent upon state rulemaking and the approval of the proposed action plan amendments by HUD. If you have questions, please contact Kevin Ogden. He can be reached at 850-717-8473, and his email is listed below. Okay, let's take a look at your questions. For some reason, they are very, very small. Pull them out.
Hey, Jeremy, it's Michaela. If you click the question, it'll make them larger.
Bless you, Michaela.
No problem.
Hold on one second. Thank you all for your patience.